Okay, just got back from the theaters with the new Spider-Man Far From Home movie. I'm going to spoil everything. I'm just going to talk about all the plot points. But if you want a short, spoiler-free review, I thought it was good, not great. A lot of fun, nothing really earth-shattering. I mean, it's not like Avengers, Infinity Wars, or Endgame. But yeah, it's just a good, fun little movie. Recommend it. Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna talk about everything then. Yeah, I like this movie. It comes after it comes after a number of Marvel movies where the stakes have been really high, right? Avengers, Infinity Wars, Avengers Endgame, and this is just like another normal superhero movie, but we need some of those to kind of space things out. So no complaints about that, although. Well, no complaints about that, but although it does kind of feel like a little bit of a letdown after seeing Avengers Endgame, which I know it shouldn't be, because we should appreciate these smaller superhero movies as well. Not every movie can be like a big event. But if I'm being perfectly honest, it does, I mean, doesn't it feel like a little bit kind of after all the excitement of Avengers Endgame? But yeah, so, Spider-Man. Of all the characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think Spider-Man is the one that comes in with the most baggage. I mean, like, nobody has really strong opinions about Thor or how Thor should be portrayed on screen. And Iron Man was, I guess he's big now, but in 2008, when that movie first came out, people were like, oh, who is Iron Man again? Yeah, like comic book nerds knew about him, of course, but Spider-Man, yeah, everybody knows Spider-Man, and everybody has kind of strong opinions about what a Spider-Man movie should be like. This movie is kind of threading the needle and I think doing what it has to do. I mean, on the one hand, I think everyone feels like Spider-Man should be kind of a high school story, kind of localized with Spider-Man and his group of high school friends, which is what the comic books were kind of throughout the 60s and 70s. High school and moving into university, but Spider-Man and his high school friends and then Spider-Man and his university friends being kind of like a teenage drama. On the other hand, this movie has to connect with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. One, because all these movies have to tie together, but I almost wonder if, because this movie is produced by Sony, if they have to if they feel like they have to lay it on a little bit thick to just kind of reassure everyone that this one is still in continuity. I don't know. I mean, it felt like they've been laying on the Iron Man connection a little bit thick in these Spider-Man movies. But then again, all these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, they keep constantly reminding you that it is in continuity. And, to be fair, I guess in Marvel comic books, Spider-Man, ever since the 80s, has been part of this larger universe. I mean, yeah, I know technically Marvel was always connected ever since the beginning. But I think the big crossover events were from the 1980s, and that's when the everything kind of became a lot more epic in the comic books. And then I think even in the comic books, Spider-Man wasn't just about him and his little group of friends anymore. Every adventure had to be a lot more epic. So, yeah, and this movie, I think, kind of threads that needle fairly well. We get kind of reminded of starts right off reminding us of Avengers Endgame and the connection to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. But then it does kind of keep it with Spider-Man and his group of high school friends. I mean, it takes him on a European vacation, but yeah, it does a fairly good job of kind of keeping the focus on the teenage relationships, which is, I guess, what you want out of a Spider-Man movie. It's a balancing act. I won't lie, there were some parts of me which would have felt like they were ruining Spider-Man a little bit by bringing in all these other characters, and it would have been nice if it just kind of stayed within the high school. But I think they're doing what they have to do to kind of balance stuff. Yeah, and then addressing the whole thing about the blip, the thing that half of the universe was vanished out of existence, and then 5 years later came back. Now, if we're going to take this seriously, and I think we should, because the Marvel movies have been taking it seriously, right? Like Endgame was a serious movie that felt like it had a lot of gravitas to it. Then this is going to be like, wow, like figuring out like all the financial and economic and sociological ramifications of what happens when half the universe, half the life in the universe is out of existence and then just reappears 5 years later. I mean, the huge changes to society. So like, I mean, you could make like a whole series about this, and I think there actually are a couple of series that have this premise, right? Like The Left Behind or The Leftovers or something like that. I actually haven't watched these series carefully, but I'm vaguely aware that there are whole series that have the premise about what would happen to the world if kind of half the population just kind of vanished, right? So this could be like a whole thing that just you could examine it really in detail. And they just kind of brush over it a little bit at the beginning of the Spider-Man movie and almost make a little bit of a joke about it, which, you know, I got a quick chuckle out of it, and then I thought, wait a minute, are we brushing over this too quickly? Should we have gone back? But then I thought about it some more, and I thought, well, they're not really closing the door on this. Like a future movie or a future TV show or whatever could still explore all the ramifications of the blip. But what they're doing is just kind of focusing you on how a high school student would feel about it. And you know that line that one girl had, right? Where she said, for those of us who have been blipped out, they're making us restart the school year from the beginning, even though we had already finished our midterms. That is so unfair. And like, that is what a high school student would feel about that situation, right? Which is not to say that you couldn't have another movie that re-examined kind of the more serious economic ramifications of this in more detail, etc. But from like a perspective of a high school student, that is what they'd be focused on. The fact that they'd had to restart the year even though they'd already finished midterms. So I think this works insofar as you say, okay, there's other more serious stuff happening, but this is just how high schoolers feel about the blip. And then, you know, there was that support group for people who've been blipped, right? Which did kind of allude to the fact that there's kind of much more serious ramifications going on with this, which could all be explored in a later movie, or it could all take place off screen. Yeah, and then Peter Parker and his high school classmates go on that trip. Right, there's a lot of humor right from the beginning, right? Right where Peter Parker is explaining his plan to Ned, and Ned is kind of making fun of his plan, or Ned has this idea to be European bachelors, Americans, and then MJ comes up and they have to quickly hide it, and kind of all this little humor in it. I thought what I often feel about these Marvel movies is I appreciate that they're trying to be funny. I feel this all the time about the Marvel movies. I feel like they're not quite as funny as they think they are. Like everyone's mugging around, and I'm like, I'm not sure that joke really deserved that moment. It's almost like a little bit too cute, but it's forgivable. There are a lot of jokes. They get like a little bit of a chuckle. The movie's not quite as funny as it thinks it is, but it's serviceable. It does the job. And to give credit is where credit is due. I'm complaining a little bit about the continuity and the tone and how it feeds into each other. I'm complaining a little bit about the humor and how the movie's not quite as cutesy as it thinks it is. But these Marvel movies, all you have to do is look at their competition to kind of appreciate what a good job they're doing. I mean, think of all the failed cinematic universes or the disaster going on at DC, to kind of appreciate with that, even though these Marvel movies could be a little sharper and could be a little bit better, they could also be a lot worse. I mean, maybe we've just gotten spoiled as moviegoers to kind of expect perfection. The fact that these movies have kept a kind of a broad continuity over 23 movies and 10 years now, and the fact that they're still kind of able to hit that kind of lighthearted tone and still have some kind of good action in it. I mean, I can nitpick a little bit, but I mean, just look at what the disaster happening over at the DC cinematic universe. And then you can appreciate that these Marvel movies are kind of broadly hitting the target. Not quite as funny as they think they are, but they're serviceable. They're broadly doing what they need to do. So they go on that high school trip. There's that scene where Flash is drinking alcohol in first class, and MJ said, actually, he's not 21, he got blipped. Which I thought was a nice little moment because one, it kind of worked comedically. And two, yeah, it's another little thing that makes you think about that blip, right? Because on Flash's driver's license, it is going to indicate he's 21, right? Because of his date of birth. So that's just another little complication that this blip is causing. But yeah, you could see how that would work. And then, yeah, the whole thing about changing the seats because of the perfume. And that guy who plays the high school science teacher really is almost the best comedic actor in the group. They gave him a lot of screen time here. And he did well with it throughout the movie. So, yeah, the dynamics are well set up. I had this kind of criticism in the first movie. And it's a little bit kind of repeated here. I don't want Spider-Man to be Iron Man, in the sense that I don't want Spider-Man to have all these drones and these high-tech suits. I just want Spider-Man to be Spider-Man. He's got his suit, but his suit doesn't really do anything in the comics, right? He's got his webs. And that's about where I'm content to leave it. I don't want him to have all this high-tech gadgetry. The first movie, I was a little bit worried about that. But then I thought kind of like the arc. The arc was Spider-Man rejecting all that high-tech gadgetry at the end of it. In this movie, he's kind of got it a little bit, and then he's kind of not got it. I was a little bit worried they were ruining Spider-Man, but I guess on the whole, they played the balance reasonably well. Mysterio. Right, talking about Mysterio. So, I said I was going to spoil everything. It's a spoiler, I guess, that Mysterio turns out to be the bad guy, because that's not the way they played it up in the teaser trailer. I actually had this spoiled for me ahead of time, because a number of reviewers on the internet are spoiling it, which I kind of regret. I wish I would have gone into this unspoiled. Yeah, spoiler warnings. Because it is kind of one of those moments. On the other hand, I did know that Mysterio was a bad guy in the comic books, like most people do. So I would kind of have been half suspecting that all along, even if it hadn't been spoiled for me. But yeah, it's pretty well set up in the movie, isn't it? He doesn't seem like a bad guy. The threat from the elementals seems real. And Nick Fury gets fooled by it, which is what makes it all the more convincing for Peter Parker and for the audience. Now, of course, you find at the very end, spoilers again, everything's a spoiler, that Nick Fury and, what's her name, Maria Hill, the Robin's character, were actually Skrulls who were filling in for them. which I guess explains why they got fooled so easily. But yeah, I guess the point being, it's a decent plot twist in the movie itself. I wish it hadn't been spoiled for me, but there you go. Now, once you find out that this whole thing was just an illusion, I don't know. I guess they do explain it with the drones and stuff like that. I don't know. I think you have to suspend disbelief a little bit. I'm not sure they could really have pulled that off with all their illusions, but they have been kind of building this up, like Stark Industries has kind of like godlike power, and they did tie this in with that thing that from Captain America: Civil War, where Tony Stark was talking about the therapy session with the holographs. I'm not sure they were planning this all along from that, but that was a nice little tie-in. And then I guess another one of these characters had been appearing all the way in the first Iron Man movie, right? So there was that flashback scene where you saw the bad guy yelling at him from the first Iron Man movie. And I was like, did they just reshoot that, or was that a genuine flashback from the first movie? I looked this up on Wikipedia, and I haven't re-watched the original Iron Man movie, but apparently that was from the first Iron Man movie, that scene. So they gotten the actor back from that, according to Wikipedia. So again, some nice tie-ins to the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe. But yeah, the way that Elementals those first few Elementals so flawlessly kind of appeared to be destroying the city and fighting Mysterio, I had to kind of I felt like I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit later when you found out it was all just an illusion. I mean, it wasn't really an illusion because those drones were really damaging the buildings, but it largely worked as a movie, I guess. Yeah, and Mysterio in the comic books was always famous for kind of those smoke and mirrors and illusions, which, yeah, if they had taken him from the comic book movie, if they had taken him directly from the comic book, that would never have worked. But the way they said these are kind of Tony Stark's holographic illusions, then that kind of worked, and that kind of trippy scene where he was kind of showing Spider-Man all his worst fears and stuff like that. I thought that kind of did a nice job of combining the idea of Mysterio from the comics with kind of something a little bit more believable with Tony Stark's holographic machines. Right, what else to talk about? Decent action scene at the end. Again, all those drones kind of firing bullets all the times and stuff like that. I thought, okay, again, this is a little bit unbelievable. I'm suspending my disbelief a little bit. I often feel like that with these Marvel movies, action scenes. As a comic book geek, I feel like I should know this, but maybe my memory is getting a little foggy in my old age. Spider-Man is bulletproof, right? Just like Superman, that kind of Spidey strength gives him invincibility. I guess that would explain why Spider-Man was able to run through that kind of hail of bullets. And then what else is there to talk about? Good fun movie, like the high school elements, like the action element of it. And then those post-credit scenes, huh? Both of those post-credit scenes were really good. There are two of them, if you didn't sit through the end credits. And they were both real stingers that not only changed the movie you just saw a little bit, but kind of seemed to set up some interesting things to come. Yeah. But boy, those ending credits are long, aren't they? I was sitting there with my wife, and I caught the morning show, so I was going to be working in the afternoon afterwards. So we were keeping an eye on the time. And I looked at the time and I said, okay, we still got plenty of time. And then we're watching the credits, and you know, those ending credits, you always think they're just about done, and then all of a sudden some more come just when you think they're done, and you're sitting there, and by the time the final one came, I looked at my watch, and I was like, wow, that was like a whole 10 minutes. We were sitting waiting for those ending credits to finish. Those ending credits just take forever, don't they? And like, you know, when these things first started coming out, it was kind of like a nice little, what's the word? Secret. There's a word for this, isn't there? Well, whatever the word is. You know, it's something that people in the know find out about, like a little extra thing. But now there's become common knowledge that there's ending scenes after every Marvel movie. Could we just move those scenes up a little bit so we don't have to sit through the whole ending credits? I mean, you know, it's no longer like a cool little surprise at the end for people in the know anymore, right? So you could just give us back those 10 minutes of our lives and move those scenes up a little bit, maybe. I don't know. It's a small thing to complain about, I know. Yeah, so overall, largely enjoyed this movie. Had to suspend my disbelief a little bit, but felt like it did a good job of what it was trying to do. Nothing earth-shattering, but an entertaining movie nonetheless. I think I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10 stars.